So sorry. Okay, guys, shall we get going? Just for those who are sitting on that side, that you can see. Okay, welcome to the second Center for Poetry and Poetics reading for this term, and a really warm welcome to our three writers who will be reading tonight. I was thinking of, we don't have a special or main guest because every single author who will be reading today is an affiliate in one way or another with them to Sheffield. So we've got Angelina D'Roza, Gareth Gavin and Helen Mort tonight, but in one way or another, either in the form of them being a PhD research student or an alumni or a former colleague, they have been somehow inhabiting in the past Sheffield as some sort of home. So what it is really is a welcome back to all the three of you. The order will be as such. So Angelina will be reading first, followed by Gareth Gavin, and we will finish the reading with Helen Mort. There won't be any breaks. Each will read for about 20 to 25 minutes. It is, on the other hand, celebratory evening because it's also a book launch, and we are launching. Are we launching? We are launching.
Yes.
Is this a Sheffield launch or?
Yes.
Yes, it is a Sheffield launch. It's definitely a University of Sheffield launch of Angelina's new book. Came out literally a month ago.
November. Yeah.
Or was it not? I don't know. Time-wise, I'm a little bit lost. Anyway, very fresh out by Longbarrow Press. Longbarrow is a Sheffield-based small press run by Brian Lewis, who's here tonight, and you will have the opportunity to buy the book at the very end of the reading and have a chat with the author and the publisher, and definitely buy the book. That's a self-promotion, but I just suddenly remember that I wrote the blurb for the book. I might actually read. No, I won't read it out. So it's slightly corrupted and stained by Lehotsky there a little bit at the very back, but ignore the blurb and just read the beautiful book because it is a stunning collection. So I'm going to introduce the three writers. Angelina D'Roza lives in Sheffield. She was a writing mentor with the Koestler Trust and writer in residence at Bank Street Arts, collaborating with artists, writers, photographers. Most recently, her work appears in Blackbox Manifold, run by Adam Piet, and Shearsman Press. Her debut collection, Envies the Birds, was published by also Longbarrow Press in 2016, and the book we are celebrating today, The Blue Hour, is Angelina's new collection and was also released by Longbarrow at the end of 2023. Honor Gareth Gavin, or H. Gareth Gavin, is the author of Never Was, a novel without a world, which came out in 2023 by Cipher Press, which has been shortlisted for the Goldsmiths Prize, and Of Midland, that was a penned in the margin book published in 2014. This was also shortlisted for the Gordon Byrne Prize. His short story, Home Death, was longlisted for the Galley Beggar Press Short Story Prize. He's also interested in writing that moves between the creative and the critical, has written a monograph on free indirect style, and currently teaches a course on trans studies. He was born in Birmingham and lives in Manchester, where he works in the Centre for New Writing at the University of Manchester. And finally, I'll introduce Helen, not that you need any introduction, but I will do it anyway. Helen Mort was born in Sheffield and grew up in Chesterfield. She's the author of 3 poetry collections with Chatto and Windus. Her most recent text or book, The Illustrated Woman, was shortlisted for the Forward Prize in 2022. She's also published a novel and a non-fiction book, A Line Above the Sky, about motherhood and mountaineering. She's a professor of creative writing at Manchester Metropolitan and a fellow of the Royal Society of Literature. So let's kick off with Angelina.
Thank you. Yes, so that made me feel a lot easier, all this. So let's celebrate your book. Let's do that. So about 5 years ago, I started working as a nurse, and I'd done it before, but not for a long time. And at the end of your shift, you have to hand over your patients to the next set of staff coming on to work. And it can be quite daunting, and they can look quite scary when they're listening to you. So I used to pretend it was a poetry reading, because I thought, I can do those. And that put me at ease, and I didn't make it rhyme or anything, but I felt better. But I feel quite nervous tonight, so I might pretend you are all the night shift coming on to look after my patients, so I hope you're ready. I'm going to start just with a short poem. I wanted to read this because I've been thinking about a woman called Linda Lee Welsh. She was my tutor about 20 years ago, and I've got this image of her, and she's standing at the window, and she's saying, don't think too much, just focus on what's in front of you and write. And it was a really nice little bit of advice that, you know, as somebody just starting out, I was like, okay, I think I can do that. And then I never really thought about it too much afterwards. But then recently I've realised how often I come back to that image of Linda Lee standing in the window, and how helpful it remains, because, you know, when you feel that pressure in the back of your head, and you know you've got to write something, there's something that wants to get said, but you've got no means of expressing it, you don't even know what it is that you want to express. What I do is I focus on what's in front of me, and sometimes the stars align, and the image and the mess of crap that's going on in my head find some form of expression that does something useful, I think. So I've got some scraps of paper to show me where my poems are, so let's find it. Okay. Correspondences. Against the blue of longing, the proximity of green. Japonica grips tight to its little leaves. A bottle of chartreuse held to the light. Japonica leaves like small print, details. Parakeet green pieces of torn paper shaking in the wind. To recognise Japonica is to know it again, as though something laid down in memory surfaces with its flowering. A cluster of pink pressed between pages, and now, years later, recovered. This is all I wanted to say, the simplest thing about love, that it is possible to know a stranger again, the calming vanilla of old books, a name unearthed, the stem preserved. The next poem that I was going to read, it's structured like a play, like a script, and I was really excited to realise that I could have a go at using this form to write a poem. I was interested to see what I could do with its boundaries, how I could push them, and what effects that might have. And the poem is called Correspondences, the Credence of Birds, and I discussed it with Chris Jones on his 2A Poetry podcast last summer. I was going to say recently, but it's not really, it's last summer. And the podcast series has a whole host of poets talking about how somebody else's poem influenced a poem that they've written, and they discuss them. And there's lots and lots of really excellent episodes on there, so it's worth looking up. It's on Spotify and other places, so give it a Google. So, correspondences, the credence of birds. A grit stone edge, boulders higgledy-piggledy, with sprouts of purple heather, no sun to speak of, but light, diffuse and silver, an evenness to it. Maybe rain, if there's the wherewithal, or a sort of shimmer to the flattened grass, as though rain has been, and absence left. A man in a red anorak, a bouldering map folded on his back, walks quickly right to left. If Heaney's chorus of bolder still birds beginning to stretch from under their shawls can be made as lovely as he wrote it, do it. Pheasants, falcons, a spray of meadow pipits darting out from their hair and hands. Chip, 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 chip. A woman climbs the rocks towards a platform stage right, with the silhouette of an ancient fort just about suggested. The bird song continues, ek, 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 ek. But she is alone. Perhaps she addresses herself, or perhaps someone else, someone absent. No questions. But the fractals in the bracken, their green mathematics, transposed as music, the closing cadence that resolves the song. She. I might believe that a kingfisher strung up on silk can predict the weather, or that placing the semen of a pigeon on someone's shirt can make that person love you. You think it's wild. But you believe time runs as the crow flies. Take the roses, replanted to my new house, those roses that know a home before this, my young son, the woman I was, its stems grown long and winding through the pale fuchsia, the fuchsia with its pale pink memory of a previous owner. The latitude of these two recollections mapped in space, in gradients, and tangled into a grammar of now or here, the woman I am. I would send you their late bloom, like a temple tumbling into the sea, to keep in your wallet with the present tense and the half-built, a botanical representation of time, the ongoing of what's gone inscribed in the ground underfoot. Chorus, sip, 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 sip. The cage in the side of the boulder opens. A Japanese tit flies out and across the water. A stone arch at the back of the stage, where the river runs down to the orchestra pit. Hanging from the stone, an iron hook and a small bell. The bird rings the bell and collects a folded piece of paper that could be your fortune from the hook. Flies into the gods, let it go. She. I would send you John Cale's Big White Cloud. After all is said and done, everything is just like it began. But time flows one way. Whatever leaves, it gathers in its talons. And to predict is to look back, to believe that autumn will cause the trees to redden. Bergson says that what we express is the dead leaves floating on the surface of the water, the various and fugitive reduced to the same handful of words, as though love isn't changed by having loved. I don't know what this means for us. Perhaps that's the point. The reds and golds were always there. It's only that we see them now. Everything's clear, everything's bright. To leave this unspoken way of being unspoken and so unchanged by language that can only approximate how it feels, to dream in birdsong, the water trickling down from the moors. The chorus boulders huddle against the cold. Chi, 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 chi. Light fades to black. Ek, 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 ek. Next poem's long. I'm just going to drink some water. Just preparing you. It is quite long, but it's written in fragments. So I think it might be okay. But I do write a lot in fragments. And I think, I don't know, maybe it was when I was trying to put a portfolio together and I was trying to write a poem and I liked what I'd got, but I couldn't finish it, or it finished too easily, or it was just turned into something unpleasant. So I put that to one side, and at some point I start another poem. And then at some point I think I realised that these poems belonged to each other. And I tried to write some sort of bridging thing. And that didn't really work out either. And I think at some point I realised that actually the gap was intrinsic to the poem. The fragments were the point, and perhaps they had something to do, or something to do with how memory is laid down, especially traumatic memory, where your brain shuts down in parts to try to protect you, and maybe letting the fragments of the poem just live in proximity is enough. Correspondences, the rhododendron tree. There's a second in the film of the snows of Kilimanjaro when the backdrop comes loose, tipping the riverbank into the corner of the screen. And if we held our disbelief in abeyance until now, it would be hard to ignore this tilted horizon that reveals not the real world, but the dream. How did we evolve to beguile ourselves so wholly, to imagine ourselves central and rhapsodic in saturated colour? Is it because we desire the landscape we marginalise, as though being the one desired should bring you to your knees, or that I, in my desire, am ashamed and so shame? When I think about this, I'm not thinking about you, but the word dream, with its capacity to signify one thing and its opposite, brings me back to my own small rhapsodic heart, which is nothing like a solution, but a restating of the problem. Or do I believe in dreams not as desire, that they are not so much the longed for depicted in a Roman mosaic and buried under the modern vine, but the Roman goddess of love and abundant wine reaching her finger out to mine, like the touch of creation, or an osprey lurching towards its prey? To reconstitute the fragments of an old question then, is love a divine gift, or a memory we dream to recover? Both the book and the film open with this riddle, that the body of a leopard lies at the summit, and no one knows why it was there. I imagine the leopard's coat still shining above the snow, its gold lovely in contrast, though without its bodily heat, the snow must bury the corpse. It's the repression of a leopard I have in mind, how the film makes us complicit in a lie. When Gregory Peck's character survives the ending, betraying the physical laws of his own narrative, do we mistake dream for fantasy, shame for love? What is it we're trying to save? To ask another way, imagine the wind chime sounding in my garden, the sparrow pitch of its blue glass leaves, chirrup, chirrup, the last year's fruit still shriveled on the branches. Do you recognise this underlying language of desire, or only the late light turning on the glass? The relationship between the dream and the waking is one of Freud's first questions. Freud tells us Aristotle thought a man's dreams reflected his bodily more than psychic health. To walk in his sleep under the burning sun might preempt a pyrexia. And so I've begun asking my patients about their dreams each morning. They take it as being a kindness, a general interest in how they slept, and I let them, why not? But in the logs I'm making, I'm hoping to find a significance between the stories they tell and their cardiovascular observations, as a form of early warning score. Perhaps they spend the night running from a falcon, only to develop an atrial flutter. Or they hear the opening strum of Van Morrison's Sweet Thing just before they wake, and later a rush to the head or a feeling of relief. In Oliver Sacks's case studies, he meets a New York grandmother who, after a stroke, had temporal lobe seizures that filled her ears with Irish songs. She, though, suffered from reminiscence, and as such can't help us with preventative medicine. At my grandmother's funeral, my uncle says, 2 English for India, 2 Indian for England. In one of Rousseau's solitary walks, he buys all the apples from a girl at the fair and gives them away to a half-dozen boys. Rebecca Solnit describes how he was practicing his defence for an imaginary trial, charged with abandoning his own children. But for all the happy moments he recalls in his walk, it is shot through with persecutory thoughts. No amount of evidence absolves him. Whatever we think we're guilty of, and we are sometimes guilty, it's only a placeholder for some deeper shame. What if guilt is, sometimes, only a rhododendron tree flowering mindlessly along the riverbank? What if these flowers were there from the start, a haunting, perhaps, their pink heads bending towards their own reflection, exiled under their own weight? Dysmetria is the inability to judge distance. It is a function of the cerebellum to know when to stop. I dream in fragments of Rhapsody in Blue, the opening phrase never descending to answer its own question. I dream in notations of wildflowers, the Iolanthe's quiet descent against the clamouring larkspur, the shepherd tone of time in dreams, rising, always rising. Do you remember that early episode of The West Wing? Cartographers for Social Equality show CJ the Gall-Peters projection, where the relative size of the continents is rendered accurately. Africa is huge and potentially upside down, and yet it was on the radio yesterday as though this is news. The world is as imaginary as it ever was. How strange we're struggling to flatten the earth after waiting so long to learn its round. But if the Peters projection is criticised for its distortions of shape and distance, there's a beautiful butterfly map that shows the world unfolding from an octahedron. Africa and South America, like facing forewings, spread out over the rest. You and I are barely there. And as though asking the stars to define my place, I'm happy to be found so harmless. Harmless, no. That we recite stories equating size with power may or may not be the fault of the old maps, but it is perpetuated by them. In another Solnit book, she says, we think we tell stories, but stories often tell us to love or to hate, to see or be blind. She has a story about a room full of apricots stripped from her mother's tree. They are, she says, her birthright, her fairy tale quest. Across the pages, some of the fruit begin to rot. Others are preserved and sent to friends. That story doesn't belong to me, but it does flicker through the one I want to tell you, about the trauma we're gifted, pass on. There's a vintage shop that's always closed and a jug in the window. I imagine it holding a handful of purple irises. It's shaped like a Savoy cabbage, its handle wrought from ropes of corn. But it's not the shape that makes me hungry. It might be the colour or glaze. But whatever else this hunger is, it is also only hunger. I've felt it before. As a child reading Rapunzel, the witch's garden made me want, as the young mother did, what didn't belong to me. No shame, child. I became aware of my small, round stomach, how it could be sucked into nothing, and I could disappear. The inverse was also true. Mostly I want to hold the jug. There's harmony in its overlapping leaves. I am ravenous with it. I felt it again tonight when I read Strawberry Fields was made by combining 2 songs in different keys. One sped up, the other slowed until almost perfect. And there it is, I want to tell you, the harmony of the continuous soul blown wide open. When his daughter calls out from a dream, Anna Freud, strawberries, wild strawberries, he says she's using her name to take possession of what she's been denied that day. But he also says that dreaming of fruit, of apples, cherries, or a half-eaten pear signifies desire for the mother's breast, to feed from it, to be it, to both possess and be possessed by what has been forgiven. Do we ever learn to live with less? The literal work of keeping the apricots from going to waste. I want this. Angela Pelster tells us that Indian yellow was perhaps introduced there from Persia and made from the urine of cows that ate nothing but mangoes. She describes how Vermeer's paintings glow with it, as though they're lit from within. The phrase applies to other fruits, plaths, blackberries, or is it the meadows, Kleinzahler's peaches. What I like about the Vermeer passage is what she says he understands, the way a red dress was never only red, but smouldering blue inside its shadowed folds. The way a wall was pockmarked with light, with every colour in the room laid beneath it. Her mother's favourite colour is yellow. She says this is because she's Dutch, because of Vermeer. I read this essay years ago, but in rereading it occurs to me, as though for the first time, that my family are as Dutch as they are Indian. And so I move through my house looking for evidence, for yellow, a cushion or vase. It's hard, she says, when looking at a beautiful thing, to know where the beauty is coming from. Sachs describes the movement of a patient's paintings from figurative to abstract as the pathology of the occipital lobe. This man no longer thinks in images, dreams in them, and if he might acknowledge the colour yellow or the geometry of a globe, strawberries, or his wife's face, the soul it expresses are lost to him. To be unable to perceive the whole, or your own whole in relation to it. Is this the same as wanting nothing? I dreamt the blue nude of Georgia O'Keeffe stepped out from the print on my bedroom wall, climbed under the covers, held me. I dream in blue and green, in rhythm. I dream in jazz drums, a kind of rain or echolocation, the reverberation of desire sketched across the blue night shoreline, presenting itself in blue waves, always coming closer, closer. I've got a really short poem to finish with, really simple one. So just before I do, Aggie was really strict that I should praise myself, so I'm great. But mostly, I am really lucky to belong to the Longbarrow family. They have quite an extensive catalogue now of really interesting writers, and they are really worth looking up. So do that, look them up, and see if there's anything you think you might like to read, because the small press is where all the exciting stuff is happening. Okay, last one. From Fairy Tale, study for the hopeful on underglaze painted ceramic. To be carried through woods to a stagnant mill pond and filled with frog spawn and algae, my blue and white porcelain holding water and waiting to see something alive. It is possible, the way cobalt blue travel to make something beautiful out of something broken is the same as how a person might break a vase, the long-stemmed iris falling to the floor as the breaker tries to cup the tumbling water that is already winding back to the river. Thank you.